React from scratch. In this video, we'll be making a React boilerplate from scratch. We'll be creating each file and making it into a template and putting it on GitHub so that we can access it later for any future projects. The purpose of this is so that we can have a better understanding of React, how it works, and what each file in a React project is actually doing. And we'll be using technologies such as, React, of course, Webpack as like a compiler, and then Babel. Let's get into it. The first thing I want to do is open up the integrated terminal. And let's start a project using npm. We'll initialize it using npm init. And it gives us a walkthrough. So first of all, package name, React boilerplate. Good to me. Version, you can add this information if you want. I'm just gonna skip through most of this, except for entry point, index.js. That looks good to me. Okay. Yes. Using npm init, what that does is creates a package JSON for us. And this is what this is gonna show what dependencies our projects are gonna use. It can have scripts, like this right here has just a test script. We're gonna be looking at this quite a bit because creating this from scratch, we're gonna have to create our own scripts. We're gonna have to add our dependencies. The first dependencies we're gonna need for a React project would be React and React DOM. In order to add dependencies inside of our package JSON using npm, we'll do npm install. You can write install or just I for short. npm install, and we want to install React. And separated by spaces, we can add multiple packages at once. React DOM. I just want to show you once this is finished, we have something else here called dependencies, which has our React and our React DOM here. Okay, now the next thing is Webpack. And when we're using, the reason why we use Webpack is it compiles our code into like static files so that when we can push it into production. We'll also be using another part of Webpack, which is a Webpack dev server, which is what we're going to use during development to preview our application. If you look over here in Webpack, you can see bundle your images, bundle your files, bundle everything. There's different dependencies that React and an application using npm is going to be using. What we're going to do is compile it into some static files. So all of our code will be compiled into like a jumbled mess of a JavaScript file, which our browser can read, but we can't really read too easily. But it makes it so we can deploy static files. Sweet. So for Webpack, there's a few different things we're going to need for our dependencies. npm install. Now here I'm actually going to do a -d. What this is going to do is create these dependencies under a dev dependency. React and React DOM in this application should be the only ones we need for production. The rest are going to be for development, preparing it for production. So first thing is Webpack. Also with Webpack, I mentioned we're going to use a Webpack dev server for. And then also there's one more, the Webpack CLI. Now the Webpack CLI just allows us to use like Webpack commands, and we're going to need this because in some of our scripts here, for starting our application and building it, getting it ready for deployment, we're going to be using the CLI for that. All right, so let's install all those, and we should see it pop up under dev dependencies. All right, so in our dev dependencies, Webpack, Webpack CLI, and Webpack dev server. Now there's something else we're going to use inside of this React application, and that's going to be Babel. Let's take a look at Babel real quick. The two that we're really going to need is our Babel preset environment, env, and our Babel preset React. Now the reason we need this is because React uses like JSX and ES6, and we want to compile it in a way where that our browser can read it. So that's what Babel's going to be doing here for us. Now with Babel though, there's a few things that we're going to actually have to add. So let's do npm install -d again. Let's add our at Babel/core. If you want to know where I'm getting these from, if you look in here, it gives you like npm install save-dev or -d Babel preset environment. In order to use these, we're going to need Babel core as well, and we're also going to need Babel loader. So Babel core, Babel loader, and at preset react at Babel preset wait. Now that we have these dependencies in here, let's start building the structure of our project. So the first thing that I like to do is to build our folder structure. And I'm just going to do it over here so it's easier to see. Create a new folder, and I'm going to call this src for source. Inside of my sources, I'm going to create some more folders. We'll create one for assets. Now this will hold things like our images, our fonts, maybe like a global style sheet, things like that. Create a new folder. I'm going to do views. This is going to hold our files like our homepage, our about me, whatever your application is going to be. This is going to be what we're going to see. There's also another folder that I want to create under source, and this one's going to be for components. Boom, and all of our components will be put in here. Sweet. Okay, now that we have these three folders here, what I'm going to do is create first of all our index.js. So let's create a new file here, and I'm going to call it index.js. Okay. Now we added a few things in here for React. Now this isn't going to run and work yet because we haven't set it up to compile or run on our Webpack dev server. But what we are going to need inside of our index.js is our React and our React DOM, which we see over here. So I'm going to import React from React, and I'm going to duplicate this line because I want this one to be React DOM from React DOM. React DOM is what's going to be used to render our application using our HTML. React DOM. I'm going to say render. And then inside of here, I can render something. What I want to render is going to be another file, which I'm going to create in here as well. I'm going to render app. And that's what's going to hold our actual information. In JavaScript, we have something called document.getElementById. I'm telling our React DOM where to put our app component, which is going to be on an ID that I'm going to create. Document.getElementById, and I'm just going to call this root. All right, let's create our app. It's going to be a new file. Create new file, app.js. All right, now inside of our app.js, we're going to need the same things. We're going to need React. We don't need React DOM because this is what we're using for, because it's a web application, and it's going to send it to our document and target the ID of root. We'll create that in a second. First, let's create the app component. I'm going to copy this, import React from React, put that same thing in here. Then I'm going to create this component. To export default function app. And then inside of here, I'm going to have a return. Inside of our return statement is where we put our JSX, which is our HTML written in JavaScript. So there's slight differences, but it's pretty similar to just regular HTML. I'm going to just create a div. And then inside of this div, I'm going to create an H1. I'm just going to say app works so we can test it. Let's go and create our index file, our index.html. Create a new file, index.html. And this is just going to be real simple. I'm just going to use a simple boilerplate HTML5. Create a layout of our HTML document. And inside of our body, create a div with an ID equal to root. Okay, just to recap what we did here is we created an index.js file, which we imported React and React DOM. We then used React DOM to show what we wanted to actually render. Now we're rendering the app component, which it comes from here. And then we're going to put it inside of our HTML using document.getElementById. Now, one thing that we'll have to do is add our app component in here as an import. Import app from app. Now, this isn't going to run yet. We don't even have a start script inside of our package JSON. So we'll have to create that. But first, before we get to this, we need to set up our Webpack and our Babel to see if we can actually compile it so that our browser can read it, and then we'll open it up in the browser. Let's start with our Babel file real quick. So I mentioned earlier in the video that we added our Babel preset environment and our Babel preset React. So I'm going to create a new file, and the way that Babel works, you can read up on the documentation on this, but the file that we want to create is called .babelrc. Now in here, this is going to be an object. And what we're going to do is take in something called presets. Right there. List of presets, a set of plugins to load and use. We'll say our presets. Now our presets, it automatically puts an array in there for us, which is good because there's two. We want to bring in our preset environment and our preset React. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. Babel preset B R preset React. Sweet. This is all we're going to need so far. All right, let's create our Webpack config file. In order for Webpack to actually work, we have to create a config file. And so let's create a new file. We're going to name webpack.config.js. Let's start off with a module.exports equals this an array. Now, Webpack, there's a few different properties that we want to give it. The first one is our entry point. We're going to say entry, and then we're going to give it a path. Now this is going to be an entry to our index.js, which is under our sources. What I actually want to do is move our app and our index.js. I want to move it inside of our source folder. I thought it was in there before. So just grab app, move it in here, and grab index, move it under source. Sweet. We got our app and we got our index in there. So for my entry, I'm going to give it a path, which is /src. Go into our source and then target our index.js. And the next thing I want to do is we got our entry. Now we're going to need our output. Now our output, I'm gonna make it an object because we're gonna say where we want it to go, the path for it to go, and then also we're gonna need the file name. So path, and then we'll write a path in here. And then on the next one, we're gonna need file name. Now for our path, I'm gonna want to add something here at the very top, which is a variable. Say const path. I'm gonna set it equal to require. I'm gonna require path. This is sweet. And that's what I'm gonna use down here. Grab our path dot join. And what I want to join is our directory name, and then we'll create a folder inside of our directory, which is our React boilerplate. We'll create a folder in there and name it something. So for the way we do that is for underscore directory name. You see that pops up. Then I'm going to do a comma, and I'm going to name it, I'm going to say /dist. This is the folder that our when we build our application, this is the folder where all of our static files are going to go. Now for our file name, we'll just name it, you name it whatever you want, but I'm going to name it bundle.js. So that's what it is. It's bundling all of our stuff. We got our entry, we got our output. Now let's add a module and give it rules. Now, the reason for this is because there's many different files we can have in our application. We can have images, GIFs, we can have fonts, we can have JavaScript, JSX, our style sheets, CSS, Sass. Those different files, we want to tell Webpack how to compile them, and then if we need any additional like packages to use those to compile them. So add module, and inside of module, this object, I'm gonna do an array called rules. Say rules, and this is an array of objects. Now our first object is going to be for our different tests. So let's say we have CSS. And the way we're going to write this in here is using regex. Each rule needs to have a test and a use. And if we need to, we can use an exclude to exclude certain files that we might not want to add to our project. First test, let's go on a new line. And I'm going to add my regex here, / /. I'm going to say anything that ends with a .js, say or JSX, and then this is how we end that. Do the money sign, / Then I'm going to do a comma, and I'm going to say exclude, and what I'm just going to exclude is our node modules. And then use, this is going to be what loader we're going to use. In our case, with our JavaScript, we're going to be using Babel loader, which we added earlier. Babel loader. Sweet. All right, let's copy this. Paste it down here. So this is for our JavaScript files, which is going to be most of our React application. We also might want to add like some styling, like some CSS. So in here, I'm just going to add, I'm going to delete this and say just .css. Anything that ends with .css. And we can get rid of this node modules, and I made a mistake here. Node underscore modules. Now for our loader for CSS, we'll use a style loader and like a CSS loader. Now real quick, I want to show you the Webpack config file on the Webpack documentation. All right, this is what I want to show you. This is what we did at the beginning here. We added the path, we did modules.exports, we added our entry point, our output here. Now for our CSS, we have our module and we have our rules. Now this one's just showing our CSS. We added a JavaScript one. This one's for specific for our CSS. Okay, so this the style loader and the CSS loader, those aren't in our project currently. So we're gonna have to add those. If we look in our package JSON, we don't see them in our dev dependency. So let's go ahead and add them. npm install -d, and we want CSS loader and style loader. All right, now that we have them in here, we can add them inside of our Webpack config file. So instead of using Babel loader, we're going to use our style loader and our CSS loader. These are loaders to load up our CSS. So Babel loader is what we're using for our JavaScript. Style loader, CSS loader is what we're going to be using for our CSS. We'll also want to add something for like images. Just thinking ahead, because most projects, most websites have images in there. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. And let's add something for our images. Now, we're going to do syntax similar to this. This is saying JavaScript or JSX. We just got to think of like some extensions that pictures have. So I know pictures usually have .png, or there's .jpeg, and we can do something like this. JPE ? G, right? JPEG. Or also we can use this to load it like a GIF. Now in our use, I'm actually going to add an object to add multiple options in here. So we have our use statement. I'm going to add an object. First thing, just like up here, our use, these are the loaders that we're loading. I'm going to define our loader. And then I'm going to define some options. Options is a object. So we're going to have a plugin. Now I'm not going to go into too much detail about the ins and outs of everything that we're using here. I'm just going to explain what it does and why we're putting it in. So for our plugin here, we're going to use something called Lodash. Now all of what we're doing here is going to allow us to load in all of these files. Now our loader for our images, we're going to use something called a file loader. Now it's a little bit different than like our JavaScript here. We're using Babel to compile this into our JavaScript bundle. Now this here with our file loader, we're going to say, hey, these are files that we're going to need in our project. So we don't have file loader currently. That's something that we need to actually include. So let's go down here. I'm going to do npm install the file loader. All right, so if we look in our package JSON, we just added this file loader. Let's go back to our config. After our module, there's something that I'm going to add here, which is going to help greatly with when we're previewing our application on our dev server. So I'm just going to say dev server. And I'm going to give it one thing called history API fallback. Set that to true. Right now, there's a few plugins that we can add just to our straight Webpack. That one would be our HTML Webpack plugin, and then also a case sensitive plugin. So first of all, before we add them, let's take a look. This is our HTML Webpack plugin. Simplifies creation of HTML files to serve to your Webpack bundles. This Webpack plugin enforces the entire path of all required modules to match the exact case of the actual path. Now, the reason I add this one is because it helps prevent errors for when you're deploying your project. It makes sure that that your paths are case sensitive. So, first of all, we have to add those, our HTML Webpack plugin and our case sensitive. So npm install dev dependency, our HTML Webpack plugin, and then space because I want to add another one. Case sensitive paths Webpack plugin, the large package name. Sweet. Add those two. There it is. Case sensitive paths Webpack plugin and our HTML Webpack plugin here. Now before I can use these, I have to add them up here as variables. Now we have a const for path. Let's add another variable. Const HTML Webpack plugin. Set that to equal wire. No, Webpack plugin. The next one, const case sensitive paths plugin. Case sensitive paths plugin. Give me our case sensitive paths Webpack plugin. We got those two plugins in there. Let's go ahead and add them in our bottom, and this is so right underneath our dev server. Plugins. All right, let's say new. This is going to be our HTML Webpack plugin, and this needs to take a few different things. First of all, our title, and then our template. So I'm just going to say our title, set it to production, then our template. We want to target our HTML file, which is same thing, which is not in our source, which it should be, and move it inside of our source folder. All right, the path for that is ./src/index.html. Now, for our new case sensitive plugin, I'm not going to add any options for it. I'm just going to add it. So, new case sensitive paths plugin, and that is it. Just to do a quick recap on that, we added our const for path. We added two plugins, HTML Webpack plugin and case sensitive path plugin. We did under our module.exports, we had an entry, which is pointing towards our index.js under the source file folder, and then our output of where to put our static or compiled files. And then we added some rules for some of the different file types that we're going to have in here. This one's for our JavaScript, for our styling, our CSS, and then for some pictures and images. We added those. What I want to do now is go into here, our package JSON, and I want to create some scripts. So in order to get this to start or to actually build, we have to add some scripts in here. Now we're not using this test script, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that. I'm going to add one called start. Now on our start script, I'm going to use the Webpack CLI. For start, we're going to start when we start this in product or in development. We want to use the Webpack dev server. So Webpack dev server -- mode development. Now there's a few options here that I'll tell you about. We have hot, so we want hot reloading, and then also -- host, which is a very useful one. We'll just say host 0.0.0.0.0. Now what this will do here is when you run your application, when you serve it from your computer, you can access it on your other devices that are on the same network, just by going to the computer's IP address, whatever port this is running on. Sweet. So that should run that. I'm going to add our build script in here real quick too. So our build, which is going to compile everything, which is when we run actual Webpack. So I'm going to say Webpack mode Production. All right, now that we have this, let's go ahead and try to run our project by using npm start. See what errors we get. Okay, so we did get an error. And it says module not found, Webpack dev server. So I looked up the documentation for Webpack because if we look in our package JSON, we are using Webpack version 5. What I've used previously in my projects was Webpack 4. So documentation, there's a few changes that needs to be added to our start script in order to start this on our dev server. And we'll just remove Webpack dev server and we'll call the Webpack CLI serve. And then the rest of it is fine. Mode, development, hot, and host should work. Now when we do npm start, we should compile successfully. Let's take a look. Boom, compiled successfully. So let's go ahead and preview this. We want to go to localhost 8080. See how it looks. 8080 and app works. So if we change this to React, boilerplate works. Save it, it'll recompile. We go over here and you can see React boilerplate works. Awesome. So the last thing that I want to do is actually push this to GitHub. I want to push it to GitHub and mark it as a template and show you that you can use this template in future React projects. Let's go to repositories. And I'm going to create a new one. New repository. Let's call this React boilerplate. Leave it as public because I will add this as a link that you guys can access and view it for yourself. Awesome. Repository. And let's copy this. All right. So I copied this link here, which is the link to our repository. And let's close our application. Okay, so I want to add this project to GitHub. First thing I'm going to do is type in git status, just to show you something here. Oops. Git status. All right. Fatal, not a Git repository. So what we have to do is add this as a Git repository. And how we do that is git init. And then we can do a git remote add origin. Let's get rid of this. Git remote add origin, and then that link that we copied from over here. Boom. Now when I type in git status, it says these are the files that they want to add. Now, everything's great here except for node modules. Node modules is something that we don't want to add, and how we do that is by creating a git ignore file. And the way that I've done it, I've shown you guys in the past how to create files is just right click, create file. I'm going to show you on macOS. What you can do is say touch, and this will create a file for you. And I'm going to say .git ignore. And this will create a git ignore file for us over here. Inside of the git ignore is where we can tell which things to not include inside of our project. So what we don't want to include is our node modules. I'm just going to say node modules. Right. Type in git status. You can see here node modules are not added because this node modules, this git ignore says which files we don't want to add. So let's go ahead and add this. Git add space dot git commit. This is our commit message that's going to show up on GitHub. And what I'm going to say is initial commit. And git push origin master. Let's go ahead and take a look here. If I refresh this page, all of our files in here. Now it's real simple to make this into a template. I'll go to settings and click right there, template repository. Now what's cool is if I go back here to the code, I now have this button called use this template. If you click that, it'll take you over here to create a new repository using that template. I hope this helped. Understand React a little bit more, what the different files are doing, and how to set up a template. Bye.